Oh, dear Lord, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? Well, of course, those are the opening lines to the well-known song, somebody's got it, If I Were a Rich Man, sung by the character Tevye in the musical and film If Fiddler on the Roof. I won't sing the rest of it. I'll probably get my yabba dabba dabba dabbas wrong. So would it be too hard to imagine a similar prayer uttered by all poor people wherever they are in the world? Well, 2 weeks ago, looking through the Church Times, I was drawn to an article that summarised the annual Joseph Roundtree's report, UK Poverty. It was published at the end of January. I downloaded it. It's 176 pages long, and no, I didn't read it all. But I want to quote from the foreword, and it says this. The report, it's a bleak read. It shows that over 1 in 5 people in the UK, 21%, are in poverty. 14.3 million people. And of these, 8.1 million are working age adults. 4.3 million are children. 1.9 million are pensioners. And it goes on to say, these numbers should shock us, but they tend not to. They have become wearily familiar, and as raw statistics, they risk masking the human stories of the grinding, challenging reality for families who face a constant battle just to afford basic items, let alone build lives of dignity or progress. And of course, that report and the measurement of poverty in this country and most developed countries, there's poverty, deep poverty, and very deep poverty. And it's measures of lowest income against averaged incomes. Now, in that same page of the Church Times, the Tear Fund, and I thought this was quite clever of them, they'd placed a large advert with a title in capitals, Breaking Free from Extreme Poverty. And in developing countries such as South Sudan, to which this advert was referring, it's common to refer to absolute poverty, where income is so low it wouldn't even cover us going to Costa Coffee or your other favourite place on the high street. Income is so low that people cannot meet basic survival needs. That's food, water, shelter. And of course, they also experience a lack of essential services such as healthcare and education. Well, today we start looking at the teachings of Jesus from the perspective of Luke in his gospel. And whilst Luke is concerned about many things, he is wary about money. And throughout the gospel, he is using his carefully selected material to show his readers, and that now includes us, what bad effects wealth and comfort can have on the human soul. And the effects can be so ingrained that those who are affected don't even know. Those who don't have to worry about their lives end up not worrying about anybody's life. And so the theme of poverty and wealth runs strongly through Luke's Gospel. And it begins at the beginning with Mary's song of praise that we know as the Magnificat, words found only in Luke. And it includes this line, casting down the mighty from their thrones and lifting up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Luke also records for us Jesus reading from Isaiah, again, unique to Luke. The Spirit is upon me The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. This was why Jesus came. It was like his manifesto. It set out what he would teach and do. His ministry would focus on the outcast and the marginalised. Of course, when we read the Gospels, there's 4 of them, several stories overlap. But there are several that are unique to Luke. And it's only in Luke, for example, that we find the story of the Good Samaritan, the story Jesus told in response to the question, well, who is my neighbour? It wasn't the priest or the Levite, it was the Samaritan who used his own money to care for a stranger. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. So loving one's neighbour includes financial generosity. There's also the story of the rich fool. You'll remember the landowner who had such good crops that he decided to pull down his barns and build bigger ones. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is demanded of you. So it is with those who build up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. And so through this parable, Jesus criticizes selfish accumulation rather than using wealth for the benefit of others. It's only Luke that tells the story of the rich man, the one who wears fine purple and eats sumptuously every day, the man with no name, and the beggar named Lazarus, who with his sores sits at the rich man's gate. And through this parable, Jesus warns us that neglecting the poor has eternal consequences. And it's only in Luke's Gospel where we can find the story of Zacchaeus' life-changing encounter with Jesus. And here he immediately commits to giving half of his wealth to the poor and repaying those he cheated. Unlike the rich fool and the rich man, Zacchaeus understands that wealth should be used for justice and generosity. So, looking at today's Gospel, well, whereas in Matthew's Gospel there's the Sermon on the Mount, we often know that as the Beatitudes, Luke has the Sermon on the Plain, perhaps a level area or a plateau, but within the same mountainous area. Luke may be recording the same teaching as Matthew, but he shortened it for us. But it could be a different occasion after all. Isn't it obvious that everything that Jesus said and did over his 3 years isn't written down? Otherwise, he didn't say very much. Now, in Matthew's versions, there are 8 blessed are those Beatitudes. And Luke has 4 positive blessed are you Beatitudes, balanced by 4 woe to you Beatitudes. The woes are a reverse of the first 4. So just thinking about the word blessed at the moment, because surely it doesn't mean that we should wish poverty on anybody as a blessing from God. Well, no. God has not blessed someone with poverty or hunger or sadness. It's not the same as, oh Lord, bless the sick, or bless so-and-so. The original text, both Matthew and Luke, use a Greek word, makarios, which conveys a sense of being fortunate, being favoured, and in a state of deep well-being. It's blessed, not blessed. Now, I don't think that necessarily makes these Beatitudes any easier to understand. Does it mean that poverty is good? Well, again, no. Jesus is not saying that poor is good. Rather, he's recognizing that a deep dependence on God now, not in the future, the poor have no illusions of self-sufficiency and are now more likely to turn to and rely on God. And then we have the woes. And through the woes, Jesus is criticizing worldly values. Those who are rich and comfortable, especially if they ignore the needs of others, may not see their need for God and are warned of eternal consequences. Actually, Luke says, "Blessed are you, woe to you." And when you read that, then that speaks to me when I read that, and hopefully it speaks to you when you read that and hear that. Matthew says, "Blessed are those," and that's somebody else. So Jesus is saying, woe to you, you who are rich and comfortable, especially if you ignore the needs of others. You may not see your own need of God, and you are warned of eternal consequences. Well, unlike in the Joseph Rowntree report, we're challenged to think beyond simple financial definitions of poverty and wealth. Jesus is not saying, if you have money, woe to you, or if you're poor, you're automatically righteous. Each one of us, whether we're rich or poor, more likely somewhere in between, we're called to put our trust, our faith in God, recognizing our complete dependence on him, and recognizing that all that we have ultimately belongs to God. Of course, Joseph Rowntree, he did this. He was a Quaker, and he was also a wealthy businessman. He used his business wealth for social reform, tackling root causes of major social problems then, and his foundation continues to this day to tackle the same issues. So next time you buy a packet of Rowntree fruit pastels, think of Joseph Rowntree. This week on the news, there was a couple in Swansea who had decided to give 2 houses away. They'd come together later in life. You can only live in one house. But they decided to give these houses away now to a homeless charity. That is inspiring. But it might be that we can only afford to buy fair trade bananas, for example, and help people who are in extreme poverty. So Luke's gospel challenges us, not just today's gospel, but throughout, regardless of financial status, to examine our attitude toward wealth, generosity, and justice. So let's, as we continue through Luke over the next few months, remember what Jeremiah wrote. God says, "I, the Lord, test your mind and search the heart." But he also said, "Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord." Amen.